The Patterson Foundation
strengthens people, organizations, and communities by focusing on issues that address mutual aspirations,
foster wide participation, and encourage learning and sharing.
Each day, each one of us goes
beyond the blog.
Join the journey.
Welcome to Beyond the Blog, a podcast series of the Patterson Foundation. Hi, I'm Alexa Carr, one of the fellows with the Patterson Foundation, and your host for today for a look into digital access for all. And to help me do that is Chief Operating Officer of EducationSuperHighway, Jack Lynch. Jack, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here.
Here's a bit of context for our listeners before we begin. EducationSuperHighway is a national nonprofit with the mission to close broadband affordability gap, the segment of the digital divide that is offline due to affordability challenges. EducationSuperHighway previously worked to close the K-12 classroom connectivity gap. Data they shared was that in 2013, only 10% of students had access to digital learning in their classrooms. Today, thanks to unprecedented bipartisan effort by federal, state, and school district leaders, supported by K-12 advocacy organizations, the classroom connectivity gap is closed. 47 million students are connected, and 99.3% of America's schools have high-speed broadband connection. In the increasingly digital world, this is life-changing for students. Today, we are going to talk a little bit about how EducationSuperHighway is shifting their operations following recent ACP rollback, the role of low-cost plans, and how they are working to increase high-speed connections to affordable apartment buildings through work with different state BEAD funding. Jack, first, please tell us a little bit about the work that EducationSuperHighway did to connect schools and how it continues on.
Sure. So when our organization was founded back in 2012 and towards the end of 2012 and moving into 2013, our mission at that time was to close the classroom connectivity gap, as you mentioned in your intro. And at the time, less than 10% of the schools in the nation were meeting the Federal Communication Commission standard for how much internet bandwidth a school should have to be able to use digital tools in the classroom, digital learning in the classroom, that sort of thing. And so the first part of that work was all about really revamping a big federal program called the E-Rate program. It's one of the universal service programs. And E-Rate was created back in 1996 when most people got online through their telephone lines and had dial-up modems. And so the program rules hadn't been substantially updated since then. So when we started our work to try to address this classroom connectivity gap in 2013, that was really one of the big challenges, was that the funding source and the program that was supposed to be helping schools get connected was very outdated. And so the first part of our work was advocacy around updating that program, and that resulted in a big E-Rate modernization effort that put billions of additional dollars into the program, and also really prioritized modern technologies for schools like fiber as opposed to dial-up modems and T1 lines, and put a new emphasis on Wi-Fi connections within the classroom so that people could actually use the bandwidth. So once those resources were in place, really our strategy was like a 50-state strategy where states were sort of our scaling unit, and we partnered with 85 different governors in all 50 states. Some states we ended up partnering with multiple governors over the course of our work, to launch initiatives to upgrade all of the underconnected schools in those states. And so, as you said in the intro, again, we started at less than 10% of the students in the country having access to the recommended speeds. By 2019, it was over 99% of schools had access to those recommended speeds. And our original plan was to sunset the organization, having accomplished our mission. But right around the time we were doing that, the pandemic showed up and created this new crisis in public health first and foremost, but also it became a crisis in education and a crisis in connectivity because school and learning and then so many other necessary resources went completely online. And so because of that, instead of deciding to sunset EducationSuperHighway, we decided that we should have a second act and refocus our efforts on home internet access, not specifically for students. Now we focus on the home digital divide and what we call the broadband affordability gap, which is the affordability part of the digital divide in anywhere where people are disconnected due to that reason in the U.S.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing about that work that you did in advocacy and scaling that work up, and then how your organization shifted to continually adapt to meet the needs. So next, Education Superhighway has been a key player in advocating for the continuation of the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is also the ACP program. Could you please tell the listeners a little bit more about the advocacy that you did and do, and how your organization is shifting and evolving as a result of this funding rollback?
Sure thing. And to start in answering that question, I'm actually going to go back to kind of the beginning of our second act, where I sort of left off the last question. And, the state of the digital divide in the United States, in terms of internet access, it's really shifted over the past several decades. So historically, the way that people viewed the digital divide was that it was mostly about getting infrastructure out to rural America. And 10, 20 years ago, this was absolutely the top challenge that we faced here in the U.S. In fact, most of our original work to connect schools was focused on reaching schools in typically very rural locations that hadn't experienced the necessary infrastructure build out. But thanks to a lot of the progress that we've made as a nation in extending broadband to rural America, the makeup of the digital divide is a lot different now. So the biggest issue now is that 2/3 of U.S. households are not online, and that's about 15 million households, not because there's an infrastructure gap, but because they can't afford the cost of internet and the cost of that monthly subscription. So that's a big deal. And that's, as I mentioned, that has now eclipsed, in terms of magnitude, the size of to be the kind of biggest part of the digital divide. It's not infrastructure, it's affordability. So that's why the ACP was such a big deal for the country, because the ACP was really the first ever program that addressed this affordability part of the digital divide, and then kind of acknowledged that, yes, this is now a huge problem, and we're going to try to do something about it. So at Education Superhighway, we really welcomed the appearance of that program. And for those that maybe don't know it, the essence of the program was that it gave low-income households $30 per month off of their internet bills. And again, that was just a game changer for what we at Education Superhighway call the broadband affordability gap. So because of the ACP, we saw that about 4 million first-time internet subscribers joined the ranks of the connected during the first couple of years of that ACP program. So it was really helping us make great progress against the digital divide. But unfortunately, despite strong bipartisan support that existed and continues to exist for the ACP, Congress failed to find a way to extend the funding for the program, and it ran out of money in May. So this was a big setback for our entire community working to close the digital divide, and it's an even bigger setback for the households that were relying on this ACP program to be able to afford internet. So getting to your question, what are we now doing at Education Superhighway? Well, we had been really focused on helping states and local communities drive awareness and adoption of the ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program. But now that it's ended, just because the program ended, it doesn't mean the need for affordable home broadband is a thing of the past. It's still very much a big issue. So again, 15 million households in the U.S. that probably won't be able to get online because they can't afford the cost of internet access. So we are of the belief that this problem can't be solved without a program like the ACP coming back in some way, shape, or form. So what we've done is we've really shifted all of the attention that we were putting into driving awareness and adoption of the ACP over to an advocacy effort to try to bring back a permanent broadband affordability benefit.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. So we've been talking about what specifically the access leg of the 3 essential elements of digital access, because that's something that Education Superhighway does so well. So going along with access, could you please share some of the resources that are available for families affected by the ACP rollback that will allow them continued low-cost internet access in the meantime?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, there is no true substitute for the ACP out there today. But there are a few resources that can help while we're trying to, again, advocate to bring something like the ACP back into the fold. So one opportunity that I point to is the FCC's Lifeline program. This is a legacy program that provides about $10 per month for qualifying households to support, typically it's either a mobile phone or home internet access. Now, the challenges with Lifeline are that not all of the same ISPs that were participating in ACP participate in Lifeline. It's a much smaller list of options. And then again, the subsidy amount is only about a third of what the ACP was. And furthermore, a lot of the eligible households for Lifeline are already using that program to cover the cost of their mobile phone. So it's not quite up to the same level as the ACP, but in some places it might be able to provide some relief and some options for people. The other good thing to keep in mind is internet service provider low-cost plans. So one of the really good things that happened because of the ACP is that when the ACP program was announced, all of the biggest internet service providers in the US pledged to offer $30 plans for ACP eligible households, which essentially made internet access free for those households if they were applying the ACP discount to these new $30 plans that ISP started offering. Well, even though the ACP is going away, the good news is that most of the providers that have been offering those plans are saying that they're going to continue to offer those plans. So there are still $30 plans out there for eligible consumers. If someone who was maybe on a plan that retailed for $60 and was paying $30 after the ACP is now feeling the squeeze because the ACP has gone away, they might be able to kind of downgrade or find a new $30 option that's going to result net in them paying the same amount out of pocket. That's one example of how this could work. So these ISP low-cost plans are another thing to look out for. And the National Digital Inclusion Alliance has a good resource on their website where you can see a lot of the details of these plans that are offered and how you can sign up for them. So that website is digitalinclusion.org, and it's a resource on their homepage called the Free and Low-Cost Internet Plans.
Thank you so much for sharing about those resources. So going back to something we mentioned earlier about partnership. Partnership is so essential to tackling these big issues like digital access. It also is something that is so central to Education Superhighway. Could you please share the role and value of partnership in accomplishing your mission?
Yeah, well, partnerships are everything for us. Our entire model is really built on partnerships. And one of the reasons for that is because the digital divide, the problem we're trying to solve, is what I call a big tent problem. So what I mean by that is you really need to make a big tent and invite a lot of different stakeholders in under the tent if you actually want to make progress against this issue. So, what that means for us is we partner with all three levels of government, federal, state, and local. We've really done that since the beginning of our work with schools. We also do a lot of partnerships with internet service providers, with other nonprofit organizations, with philanthropy. And where we sit within all that is our role is really sort of like a matchmaker. So we advocate for public resources like the ACP or like the E-rate modernization that I talked about when we were working on school connectivity. And then one of our superpowers is that we are able to use data and analyze this data that maybe not a lot of other people have to identify in a really targeted way where the areas of opportunity are for these resources. And then we work to bring together the public sector, the private sector, the households we're trying to impact and create like a win-win-win that'll ultimately close the digital divide and lift everyone up. And so, when we, as I mentioned in the intro, when we were working to connect schools, we partnered with 85 different governors in all 50 states. We partnered with hundreds of internet service providers during that work and thousands of school districts. Now, with our current mission to close the broadband affordability gap, we've been following a similar blueprint to bring all these different stakeholders together. And one new type of stakeholder that we've been engaging with this second act for Education Superhighway is affordable apartment building operators, which includes public housing authorities, nonprofit apartment building operators, and private apartment building owners that have affordable units.
That truly is a superpower, being able to bring all of those stakeholders together. And that last point that you made brings perfectly into the last final question. Could you please share about how Education Superhighway's work in providing high-speed connections to affordable apartment buildings? And could you also share how this relates to state BEAD funding?
Absolutely. So again, even with the ACP ending, the need for affordable home broadband is not, and we need other solutions right now that are going to help provide that affordability relief while we're working on bringing something like the ACP back. And at Education Superhighway, we did not have all of our energy solely in the ACP. We have for the last 3 years also been working on another strategy that's really focused on apartment buildings. So about 25% of the households who can't afford the cost of internet in the U.S. live in multifamily housing. So that's a big area of opportunity for this, for people trying to solve this problem like us. And because of this, we developed a program we call our Apartment Wi-Fi program. Couldn't come up with a more creative name, that focuses on delivering free or low cost access to households that live in apartment buildings. And there was a really good public funding opportunity that can support this in the $42 billion BEAD program, which is part of the big infrastructure bill that passed a few years ago. There's a specific provision within this BEAD program that calls on states to focus on apartment buildings with high rates of disconnectivity as they're working to deploy this funding. And so that sets up really well for this part of the problem that we're trying to address. So around 30 states and counting have created specific programs within BEAD or with some other funding pot that they had access to focus on connecting low-income apartment buildings to the internet. And this continues to be a big area of focus for us. And again, the good news with the ACP going away is that the funding for this work is not impacted by the wind down of the ACP. So we've been partnering with states to help them develop these types of programs that are focused on connecting apartment buildings. Then identifying the specific buildings across the state that have a need in this area and are good candidates to receive that funding and receive that investment. And then we're also reaching out to apartment building owners to educate them on these opportunities and how they can take advantage of them. And then at the same time, working with internet service providers and managed service providers to ensure that they're able to serve these buildings with really strong technical solutions.
Thank you so much for sharing about those programs. Is there anything else that we should highlight today, either about Education Superhighway or digital access?
Yeah, well, I'll just call out a few resources that can provide more information about all the different things I've been talking about. So if you're interested in learning more about our work, you can visit our website at educationsuperhighway.org. And if you have any specific questions about our work, or if you'd like to follow up on our advocacy for a permanent broadband benefit, a good way to do that is to send an email to info@educationsuperhighway.org, and someone will definitely be monitoring that inbox, and we'll be able to get back to you and direct you to whoever the right person is in our organization to follow up with. And I just also want to thank the Patterson Foundation for inviting me to be on this podcast and for all that you do in this digital equity space. And thank you to everyone who's listening, who's also involved in these efforts to close the digital divide. As I said earlier, it's a problem that is going to take a lot of work from a lot of different organizations. And at ESH, we are constantly inspired by everyone else who's doing this type of work all over the country. So thanks to all of you.
Well, Jack, thank you so much again for joining me today. Listeners, to learn more and to stay tuned, please visit thepattersonfoundation.org. Thank you so much.
Listeners, thanks for joining us beyond the blog.